Everyone knows Kuldara, Rajasthan's famous ghost town, but there's another village buried deep in the arid hills that locals refuse to talk about, Bhairavpur. Try looking in modern government records, and you won't find a single entry after 1978. That year, on a single, unremarkable night, the entire population vanished. Investigators scoured the empty homes, but they found absolutely no evidence of a struggle. No bodies were recovered. No blood was left behind. Look at the terrain surrounding the settlement. For hundreds of people to quietly pack up and march out of this isolated valley entirely unnoticed would be nearly impossible. The absolute erasure of Bhairavpur came down to a single night, a direct consequence of one outsider ignoring the village's only rule. That outsider was Ravi Tripathi. He was a young schoolteacher who had just arrived in Bhairavpur for a new assignment, fully expecting a quiet, predictable life in the countryside. During the day, that's exactly what he got. The children played loudly in the streets, and the village women spent their afternoons drawing water from the communal wells. The rhythm of the town was set by the heavy bells of the ancient stone temple, which echoed out across the valley during daylight hours. But the moment the sun dipped behind the hills, that peaceful atmosphere evaporated. Every heavy wooden door in the village was bolted shut from the inside. Even the stray animals and birds went completely silent. When Ravi finally asked one of the local elders about the evening lockdown, he was given one very specific piece of advice. If he ever heard the temple's third bell ring in the dead of night, he must never, under any circumstances, open his window. Ravi laughed. He saw the warning as a bit of local folklore, a quaint attempt to enforce a curfew through fear. 3 days into his posting, the sun set exactly as it always did, casting long, heavy shadows across the empty dirt roads. The doors locked, and the lockdown began. Inside his small house, Ravi sat alone in absolute silence. As the hours slowly ticked toward midnight, the quiet became a heavy, suffocating pressure, pressing against the walls of his room. The only thing separating him from the pitch-black village outside was a single weathered wooden window frame. Ravi's mind raced as he tried to logic his way through the creeping paranoia. He repeatedly told himself it was just the isolation playing tricks on him, that there was absolutely nothing out there. When you are trapped in an environment completely devoid of sound, your brain begins to strain, desperately listening for the exact noise it fears the most. At exactly 2 a.m., the dead air was violently shattered. A heavy iron chime from the temple rang out. Then a second. Then came the third bell. The moment it echoed through the valley, the village's power instantly cut out, plunging Ravi's room into absolute darkness. Outside, the silence was replaced by a new sound. He could hear slow, heavy footsteps dragging themselves through the dirt, moving directly towards his front door. Blind panic finally broke through his rational exterior. Desperate to see what was approaching, Ravi grabbed the latch and threw open his window. The street wasn't empty. Below him stood an enormous crowd of hundreds of villagers, packed together shoulder to shoulder in the dead of night, entirely motionless. Every single neck in the mob was snapped upwards at an unnatural angle, locking onto his window. And as his eyes adjusted to the dark, he realized their eyes were completely white, devoid of any pupils. A lone woman carrying an old, flickering red lantern stepped to the front of the crowd. Without moving her lips, a voice declared, "Now you have seen us." The entire mob immediately surged toward his house. Opening that window was a fatal mistake. It broke the silence that held the village together, turning a superstition into a reality for everyone inside. The next morning, the bright desert sun illuminated a perfectly silent Bhairavpur. The streets were entirely deserted, and homes stood completely empty, with zero signs of forced entry. Ravi Tripathi was never seen or heard from again. He, along with every man, woman, and child in the settlement, had simply ceased to exist. When local police finally entered Ravi's room, they found a single piece of evidence carved deeply into the stone wall above his bed. The investigators documented the rough text before abandoning the site entirely. It read, "No human survives after the third bell." Today, Bhairavpur remains a dead zone, The surrounding population enforces a strict, unspoken quarantine around the ruins, refusing to travel anywhere near the valley after dark. So, if you ever find yourself wandering the remote stretches of Rajasthan at midnight and you hear 3 heavy chimes echo across the hills, keep walking and never, ever look back.